She marched straight through my gate like she owned the place. Heels clicking on dry gravel, clipboard in one hand, and an expression that screamed, "Rules are for other people." I was saddling up when I saw her, and for a split second I thought maybe she was lost. Then I spotted the placard on the dashboard of her silver SUV. HOA President, Gloria Braddock. I sighed. Not this again. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself, didn't even glance at the big metal sign that said in no uncertain terms, "Private Property." She was already halfway to my barn before I could catch up, barking into her phone about non-compliant paint colors and possible code enforcement. I called out, but she raised a finger like I was her in turn, told whoever she was speaking to, "I'll handle it myself," and reached for my barn door like it was her storage unit. That was the last straw. I stepped up, yanked the door shut with one hand, and pulled the pepper spray from my belt with the other. "You've got 2 seconds to turn around," I said, "before your day gets very spicy." Her eyes widened, nostrils flared, and for once in her life, Gloria Braddock backed off. What she didn't know. The whole thing was caught on camera. And this was just the beginning. It all started 3 weeks earlier, when I got a letter in the mail with a strange return address. Riverpoint Homeowners Association. At first, I thought it was junk. My ranch sits a good 15 minutes outside of town, and I've never been part of any HOA in my life. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. The letter said my ranch was now within the extended purview of the Riverpoint HOA, following a recent land annexation and neighborhood expansion initiative. They called my barns unsightly, my fencing non-regulation, and my hay bales a fire hazard to the community. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so serious. These people actually thought they could take a piece of the countryside and slap some suburban paint on it. I ignored the letter, figuring it was either a mix-up or the work of some overzealous bureaucrat. But then came the second envelope, this one stamped with red ink, final notice. They were threatening fines. Thousands in compliance fees. I called the number listed, but all I got was voicemail. That's when I realized, this wasn't a mistake. This was a hostile takeover dressed up in legalese and HOA mumbo-jumbo. I spent the next few days gathering paperwork, deed history, survey maps, even a dusty old letter from my grandfather that proved the ranch had been in our family since 1954. The land predated Riverpoint by decades. Their little neighborhood? It hadn't even broken ground until the early 2000s. But while I was busy preparing a response, Gloria Braddock was getting bolder. The day she showed up uninvited was one of those high desert mornings that starts out quiet, sun just starting to climb, birds stretching their wings, not a cloud in the sky. I was brushing down Blue, my quarter horse, when I saw her SUV slow roll up the gravel road like a funeral procession. No courtesy call, no email, just her royal self and a vehicle full of entitlement. I walked out to meet her halfway, thinking maybe she was just confused. But no. She didn't even pause when I called out. She hit me with a barrage of HOA jargon the second I got within earshot. "This barn is in violation of Aesthetic Code 14B, she snapped. "You need to remove the solar panels from the roof unless they match the slate gray palette approved by the design committee." I blinked. Design committee? Lady, this is a working ranch, not a cul-de-sac. She huffed like I'd just insulted her ancestors and pointed at the barn. "This structure needs to be color approved and filed under HOA Form 22C. That's when she tried to open the barn door. I was on her in 2 strides, shut the door right in her face, and pulled out the pepper spray from my side holster. I didn't spray her, not yet, but I held it up and locked eyes. "I don't know who told you this was your territory, but if you take one more step, you're going to find out what cayenne oil feels like in mascara." She froze. Not out of fear, but because no one had ever talked to her like that. I could tell. She sputtered, turned on her heel, and stomped back toward her car. "You're making a huge mistake," she yelled over her shoulder. This property is now under HOA jurisdiction. But she didn't know what I knew, and what I had filmed. You see, my entire property's got security cameras hidden in birdhouses, fence posts, even the weather vane. I've had a few issues over the years. Cattle rustlers, stray hikers, even a weird doomsday cult once, so I stay prepared. Every second of her little inspection was caught on camera, from the moment she stepped past the sign to the second she flinched at the pepper spray. I watched the footage back that evening while sipping coffee and shaking my head. I knew right then, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Gloria had the smugness of someone who thought the law was on her side. She didn't realize the law was about to smack her with a reality check. Over the next few days, the situation escalated. Another letter showed up. This one claimed I was in breach of environmental standards because I used too much irrigation water on a ranch that uses drip lines and harvests rainwater. Then they accused me of livestock mismanagement because Marvin, my bull, was visible from a nearby walking trail. Apparently, a cow chewing grass was too disturbing for their sunset jogs. I knew what they were doing. They were trying to paper-cut me into submission. Fine after fine. Form after form. They were hoping I'd cave, comply, and repaint my barn to match their khaki-colored dreams. But they didn't understand one thing. This land wasn't just soil and fences to me. It was legacy. It was blood, sweat, and freedom. It was mornings feeding calves before school. It was my dad's ashes under the old oak. And no clipboard-carrying queen bee was going to take that from me. I made a few calls, to the sheriff's office, to a property rights lawyer, to the county zoning board. Every one of them confirmed the same thing. The HOA had no legal authority on my land. None. The zoning hadn't changed, and no annexation could override private ownership rights like mine. But Gloria didn't care about the law. She cared about control. And if she wanted a war, well, she'd just picked a fight with someone who could aim, spray, and outlast. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about principle. And I had more than pepper spray on my side. I had the truth. I had the law. And I had one hell of a plan. The sun rose slow and red the next morning, casting a blood-orange hue over the fields like it knew something was coming. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel again. For a second, I thought maybe it was Gloria returning for round 2. But this time, it wasn't her SUV. It was a landscaping crew in a large, unmarked pickup, 3 guys in bright neon shirts and city-issued gloves, already unloading mowers and trimmers onto my front pasture. I stepped onto the porch and called out, asking what exactly they thought they were doing. One of them, a guy with wraparound shades and a Bluetooth earpiece, waved a folded paper at me. HOA maintenance order, he said, as if that explained everything. He didn't even look up. Just started the mower like he was about to clean up someone's median strip. I walked right over and snatched the paper from his hand. It was a joke. An actual HOA maintenance citation with my ranch's address crudely typed in at the bottom, referencing some ordinance about community beautification. It was laughable. My land didn't even fall within the HOA's jurisdiction, and even if it did, no suburban group had the right to send landscapers onto private agricultural property. I told the guy to pack it up, warned him that if he cut 1 inch of my grass, I'd be calling the sheriff and charging trespassing. He hesitated until Marvin the bull strolled over from the pasture, curious about the noise. The mower guy took one look at the 1,000-pound mass of horns and muscle staring at him through the fence and decided discretion was the better part of landscaping. They left in a hurry, tools still rattling in the bed of the truck. But I wasn't laughing. I knew now that Gloria was escalating. This wasn't about letters or complaints anymore. She was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push before someone pushed back. I wasn't about to let her find out the hard way. I spent the rest of the morning contacting my attorney and getting a full property boundary review started. I had to prove to the county that there hadn't been some sneaky annexation, some loophole Gloria might try to exploit. I also ordered new signs for every fence post and gate, larger, brighter, with the full legal clause for trespassing printed in bold. I wanted there to be zero doubt. If you set foot on my ranch without my say-so, you were violating state law. That night, I reviewed all the footage from the previous week, just to be thorough. I found something strange. On the southern edge of the property, where the fence runs near a wooded area, there was a short clip from 2 nights ago. The motion camera had picked up someone creeping along the outside fence line with a flashlight. A figure in a blazer and heels, awkwardly navigating the uneven terrain. Gloria. She wasn't just trespassing. She was snooping, probably trying to document something she could use. The footage was blurry but clear enough to identify her. My jaw tightened. This wasn't overzealousness anymore. It was obsession. The next morning, a certified envelope showed up, hand-delivered by a courier. Inside was a full HOA cease and desist notice. It accused me of defying community standards, warned of escalating fines, and said the HOA would begin assessing penalties for each day I remained non-compliant. It even claimed they'd begun liability monitoring for any injuries that might result from my livestock wandering into shared spaces. I nearly tore the paper in half from laughing so hard. Shared spaces? My nearest neighbor was half a mile away, separated by acres of cattle fencing and a creek. But just to be safe, I drove into town and walked straight into the zoning office. I brought every document I had: survey maps, deed history, ranch boundaries dating back to the 50s, and copies of all the HOA letters. I sat down with a clerk named Ben who looked like he'd seen every ridiculous land dispute in the county twice over. When I explained the situation, he gave me a long stare, then said, "You've got to be kidding. Riverpoint's trying to claim your land." I nodded. He checked the records. "Nope. Your parcel was never part of their subdivision. They'd need to file an annexation request, and that would take months, and your approval." That was all I needed to hear. I requested official copies of the parcel map, zoning confirmation, and a certified document stating that my land was not and had never been under HOA authority. Ben even offered to have the county surveyor sign off on the map to remove any doubt. I left the office with a thick folder of legal ammunition. I stopped by the sheriff's department next. Deputy Laird, a guy I knew from high school rodeos, looked over the footage I brought and said, "You've got her dead to rights. If she sets foot on your land again, call us. We'll take it from there." Back at the ranch, I posted laminated copies of the county documents on the front gate and at the southern fence line. I added a fresh lock to the pasture entrance and mounted a new motion sensor that triggered both floodlights and a loud voice warning. Anyone who approached would be hit with a booming message: "You are trespassing on private agricultural land. Leave immediately." It was dramatic but effective. 2 nights later, the voice went off. I grabbed my flashlight and my pepper spray and slipped out the back door, moving quiet and low toward the south fence. Sure enough, Gloria was back, again in heels, trying to use her phone to take pictures of the barn from the edge of the woods. She froze as soon as the floodlight hit her. "You can't keep harassing me," she yelled, trying to shield her eyes. "This land is under HOA regulation and you will comply." I stepped closer, pepper spray raised just enough to be visible. "You're about 10 steps past delusional," I said calmly, "and 30 seconds from jail." She started to argue again, but then a second voice rang out. Deputy Laird's cruiser had pulled up just outside the gate. His spotlight hit her square in the face. "Ma'am," he called out, "step away from the fence, and keep your hands where I can see them." Gloria looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. She tried to save face, claimed she was performing a community inspection, but Laird wasn't buying it. He escorted her to the edge of the property and issued an official citation for criminal trespass. As she got into the cruiser, fuming and mascara smeared, she turned back and shouted, "You haven't heard the last of this." I gave her a wave and said, "You're right. I'll probably hear about it on the police scanner." Back inside, I re-watched the footage and filed it away for the inevitable court case. I knew this wouldn't end with one citation. Gloria was the kind of person who couldn't stand being told no. But now she knew I wasn't just some country bumpkin with a barn and a bad attitude. I had proof. I had backup. And I had no intention of letting her rewrite the law to fit her fantasy of power. This was my land, and I'd defend it with every tool I had, legal, tactical, and yes, spicy if necessary. The next few days passed in a strange sort of quiet, like the eye of a storm. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Gloria had been slapped with a trespassing citation, the county confirmed I was fully outside her jurisdiction, and my security footage made it impossible for her to twist the truth. But knowing people like her, I figured silence didn't mean surrender. It meant plotting. I kept to my usual routines but stayed extra alert. I double-checked my fences. I updated my trail cams. Even Marvin seemed more on edge than usual, tossing his head and pacing the pastures like he smelled something sour in the wind. Then one evening, just after dusk, the alarm tripped again. This time, it wasn't from the front gate or the south line. It was the far western side of the property, near an old service road barely anyone remembered. The motion sensor triggered the floodlights, and I watched from my monitor as a figure ducked down, trying to stay out of sight. It was Gloria again, wearing all black like she was auditioning for a heist movie, a large tote bag slung over her shoulder, and what looked like a measuring tape in her hand. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. She was trying to gather more evidence, probably to justify some ridiculous HOA complaint or backdoor legal stunt. But she wasn't just crossing a line anymore, she was actively targeting my home like a saboteur. I didn't wait this time. I grabbed my flashlight, the pepper spray, and a fresh SD card to swap into the main trail cam. As I walked the gravel path toward her last seen location, I kept to the shadows, listening. Sure enough, there was the faint sound of her muttering to herself, mixed with the metallic click of her tape measure. 12 feet from the easement, 7 feet to the fence, non-compliant structure detected. I edged closer until I could see her crouching by one of my utility sheds, trying to photograph a set of rain barrels. I stepped out slowly, my flashlight trained on her. "Didn't expect company tonight, did you?" I said flatly. She screamed, nearly dropped her bag, then spun toward me like she thought she could bluff her way out of it. "You have no idea the kind of trouble you're in," she snapped, trying to stand tall despite clearly being rattled. "This whole setup violates so many municipal codes it's ridiculous. And once I present my findings," I cut her off. "Findings? You're trespassing. Again. In the middle of the night. With a bag full of tools and a phone full of stolen photos. This isn't an inspection, it's breaking and entering." I pulled out my phone and hit record just in time for her to lunge toward me, yelling something incoherent about citizen authority. I didn't even flinch. I raised the pepper spray just enough for her to see it, and she froze. This time, she wasn't getting away clean. Before she could backpedal, a second voice came from behind us. "Is everything all right here?" It was Deputy Laird again, drawn by the alarm that I'd programmed to ping the sheriff's department whenever it was tripped more than once in a night. Gloria paled. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she said, switching tones like flipping a switch. "I was simply collecting information for the HOA board. This resident has been violating our community guidelines, and Laird stepped closer and held up a hand. "Ma'am, you've already been cited for trespassing. You were informed not to return to this property without the owner's permission. That was less than 5 days ago." Gloria's mouth opened and closed, like she was trying to calculate whether charm, threats, or tears would work best. None of them came in time. Laird asked me to email him the footage from my cameras and then turned to Gloria. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for criminal trespass and harassment. Please place your hands behind your back." She exploded then, screaming that she was being treated unfairly, that I was dangerous and unstable, and a rogue element undermining the community. But none of it mattered. Laird cuffed her gently but firmly and led her away, still ranting as the cruiser door shut behind her. By the time the taillights disappeared down the road, I stood alone in the dark, half stunned. Not because she'd been arrested again, that had been coming, but because I realized she truly believed she was in the right. Gloria Braddock wasn't just entitled. She was convinced that order only existed when she was the one giving commands. And now that her grip on power was slipping, she was spiraling into obsession. That night, I made backups of every video file, every document, and stored it all in both the cloud and 2 hard drives locked in my safe. I wasn't about to lose a scrap of evidence in case this lunacy ended up in court. The fallout came faster than I expected. 2 days later, a neighbor I barely knew stopped by. He was polite, apologetic, and curious about what was going on. "Word's getting around," he said. "HOA board's holding emergency meetings. A bunch of residents are demanding Gloria step down. Apparently, she spent several $1,000s of HOA funds on private legal consultations without informing the board." That didn't surprise me. The only thing Gloria loved more than authority was using other people's money to keep it. I thanked him for the update and offered him a carton of fresh eggs. He left with a handshake and a promise to support the ranch if things got ugly. That evening, I parked myself in front of my computer and began drafting a full formal complaint. Not to the HOA, that was pointless, but to the county, the sheriff, and a lawyer who specialized in property rights. I included timestamps, video links, scanned documents, and a thorough explanation of the harassment I'd endured. My goal wasn't just to stop Gloria. It was to make sure no one ever tried this again. I requested a restraining order, civil damages for trespassing, and an inquiry into whether HOA funds had been illegally used to pursue actions against private landowners. And then I waited. The calm before the storm had passed. Now the thunder was coming. The next morning, just before sunrise, I got a phone call from someone I didn't recognize, a reporter from a local news station. "We heard you've got footage of the HOA president trespassing on your ranch. Would you be willing to talk about it?" I paused, surprised but not entirely caught off guard. Word spreads fast in small towns. And when you've got video of a woman in designer shoes getting arrested in a cow field, people tend to pay attention. I told the reporter I'd think about it, then hung up and stared out across my land. The sun was coming up again, same as always, and Marvin was already out there grazing, tail swishing at flies like nothing had changed. But something had. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was becoming the example. The one who said no. The one who didn't roll over when fake power tried to stomp in with heels and a clipboard. Gloria thought she was dealing with just another hick in a hat. She didn't know I had records, cameras, and one hell of an aim. And I had no plans to miss. The morning after Gloria's second arrest, I woke up to a strange quiet. Not peaceful, not ordinary, but the kind of quiet that feels like the moment just before the clouds split open in a storm. The town was talking. I knew it before I even opened my gate. My phone was full of missed calls and text messages from unfamiliar numbers, and 2 new envelopes sat in my mailbox, one from the HOA and the other from the county. I made coffee, fed Marvin, and then sat down at the kitchen table with the letters. The one from the HOA was exactly what I expected, a formal notice stating Gloria had been temporarily suspended as president pending review of her actions. It tried to sound diplomatic, but it read more like an attempt to distance the board from her madness before it took them down too. The second letter, though, was better. It was from the county attorney's office, acknowledging receipt of my complaint and confirming that they were opening a preliminary investigation into potential misuse of HOA funds and abuse of authority. I wasn't the only one who'd had enough. Turns out several neighbors had begun filing their own grievances, especially after hearing about Gloria's late-night stunts and discovering their dues had gone toward hiring a lawyer for a vendetta she kept hidden from the board. One neighbor, a retired school principal named Hank, even called to apologize for not stepping in sooner. He said they'd all thought Gloria was just being strong-willed, and didn't realize how far she'd gone until she got cuffed at my fence line. I kept my head down, tending to chores and updating my camera footage logs. I was ready to move on, but Gloria wasn't. 2 days later, another inspector showed up, this one with a county badge and a serious look on his face. He introduced himself as Rick Callahan, Code Compliance Officer for Unincorporated Properties. I invited him in, showed him every inch of my paperwork, every documented date, signature, boundary survey, even a notarized letter from the original zoning board dated back to the 80s. He took his time, asked polite questions, and seemed genuinely irritated that he'd been sent out on what he called a waste of tax dollars. When I asked who filed the complaint, he sighed and muttered something about anonymous filings and external pressure from legal reps with shaky paperwork. I didn't need to guess. Gloria was trying to bypass the HOA now and weaponize the county. But Rick wasn't a fool. He walked my property, took a few photos for protocol, and then turned to me and said, "You've got one of the cleanest, most compliant ranch operations I've seen in years. This complaint won't go anywhere." He gave me his card, told me to call if any more nonsense came my way, and left shaking his head. I walked back toward the house, hoping maybe that was the last of it. I should have known better. The next morning, a neighbor sent me a link to a video. At first I thought it was another doorbell camera clip or trail cam moment. But it wasn't. It was Gloria. Screaming. Not just screaming, but losing her absolute mind in the middle of the county building parking lot. The video showed her berating a county staff member, demanding to know why no one had shut my ranch down, waving her arms around like a windmill on fire, and accusing half the city of conspiring against the safety of River Point. She went so far as to accuse the sheriff of colluding with rogue livestock owners. The clip was only 2 minutes long, but it went viral faster than prairie fire in a dry season. Hundreds of comments flooded in. Most people couldn't believe a woman would go that ballistic over a barn. Others speculated whether she needed a vacation, medication, or both. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or be concerned. But either way, it confirmed one thing: Gloria wasn't just determined. She was unraveling. Later that week, I heard from a friend who worked at a local news station. They wanted to cover the full story. At first, I hesitated. I'm a rancher, not a showman, and I don't much like having my business out there for strangers to pick apart. But after what Gloria had put me through, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about boundaries, property rights, and standing up to the kind of arrogance that thinks laws don't apply to the entitled. So I agreed to the interview. They sent out a small crew, a camera guy and a young reporter named Dana. I showed them everything. The gate signs, the barn, the rainwater barrels she claimed were illegally installed. Dana couldn't stop shaking her head in disbelief. When the segment aired, it lit a match in the HOA boardroom. Not only did it feature Gloria's parking lot meltdown, but it also detailed her misuse of funds, her trespassing arrests, and even included a brief legal statement from my attorney confirming she was being investigated for harassment. The response from the community was overwhelming. HOA members flooded the board's inbox with calls for Gloria's permanent removal. A special vote was scheduled, and just 2 days later, in a packed meeting room with over 50 residents, Gloria was officially stripped of her title as president. She didn't take it quietly. She stood, pointed at me in the crowd. Yes, I attended, and shouted, "You all think this is over? You think he's your hero? He's a fraud." Security calmly escorted her out while the room applauded. I thought that would be the end. I really did. But then, one last envelope showed up. Not from Gloria. This one was official, a notice that my ranch had been nominated for the county's Historic Agricultural Heritage recognition, thanks to documentation submitted during my legal filings. Apparently, someone in zoning had flagged it for review, and the committee deemed my land worthy of protection as a heritage site. It meant stricter legal safeguards, tighter boundaries, and a huge PR boost for everything I'd worked for. A week later, I got the plaque. County officials visited, took photos, and issued a public statement thanking me for preserving the region's rural integrity in the face of suburban overreach. The best part? They posted it on the county website, right beneath the section listing code violations and citations, where Gloria's name now appeared more than once. That night, I sat on the porch with a cold drink, watching the sun dip behind the barn, and listened to the sounds of a land that finally felt quiet again. Marvin snorted somewhere in the field, birds settled into the trees, and not a single SUV crawled down my road. Gloria's legacy in Riverpoint was reduced to a punchline. Mine? Well, let's just say people started calling me when they had questions about property lines, zoning disputes, or how to handle HOA drama without losing their mind. I didn't mind. I wasn't out for revenge. I just wanted peace. And now, for the first time in months, I finally had it. It was strange how quickly things returned to normal once the storm passed. The chaos, the threats, the trespassing, all of it seemed to vanish the moment Gloria was officially ousted and her antics laid bare for the entire community to see. The same neighbors who once kept their distance now waved at the fence line, some stopped by for fresh eggs or asked if I'd be selling produce that summer. A few of them even apologized outright, admitting they hadn't realized just how far out of line things had gone under Gloria's leadership. I didn't hold it against them. Some people don't recognize madness until it parks in their driveway wearing heels and holding a clipboard. I wasn't bitter. I just wanted my peace back, and for the first time in months, I had it. I took some of the heritage recognition funds and built a new gate, one that made a statement. 10 feet tall, custom-welded iron, with a carved metal sign bolted at the top that read, "Private ranch, trespassers get the pepper and the spray." It wasn't just decorative. The new gate came with solar-powered floodlights, security cameras, and a motion sensor sprinkler system rigged to go off whenever someone came too close uninvited. It was part joke, part deterrent, and all satisfaction. Every piece of that system was legal, within code, and impossible to argue against. Anyone who tried to open my gate without permission would be met with a recorded message in a deep drawl warning them to turn back unless they had a good reason and no clipboard. I also decided to lean into the moment just a little. A friend who ran a small local press helped me design a line of signs that poked fun at HOA drama. Things like, "This is a HOA-free zone, we prefer cattle over committees," and "Marvin the Bull is head of security." People loved them. A few nearby ranchers asked for copies. One woman said it reminded her of her father's property growing up, back when boundaries were respected and neighbors knew when to leave well enough alone. I didn't set out to be a symbol, but somehow that's what was happening. My refusal to cave had struck a nerve. Maybe people were just tired of being pushed around by petty power and bad attitudes wrapped in fake authority. Then came the real cherry on top. One morning, I got a call from a lawyer representing a group of Riverpoint residents who were planning to sue the former HOA leadership for misuse of dues and harassment. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to provide testimony, and if they could use my video evidence to support the case. I said yes without hesitation. I wasn't looking for vengeance, but if my experience could help stop the next Gloria from rising to power, then I was all in. The legal process would take months, maybe longer, but it was already making wave. Local news picked up the story again, this time with a headline that read, "From Trespassed to Truth, How One Rancher Stood Up to HOA Tyranny." They even used a photo of me standing next to Marvin, who, incidentally, had developed a bit of a fanbase himself after the viral clip showed him chasing off those landscapers like a four-legged bouncer. Despite all the attention, I didn't change. I still got up before the sun, still tended my livestock, still fixed fence lines and moved hay like I always had. But there was a new energy around the place. My niece came to visit and said the ranch felt more alive, like it was finally breathing easy after holding its breath for too long. I guess I felt the same. The land had always meant freedom to me, and now it was like that freedom had been tested and come out stronger. The scars left behind by Gloria's actions were fading fast, replaced by something steadier: respect, recognition, and a whole lot more fences. One late afternoon, I saw a black car pull up just outside the property line. I stood from the porch, narrowed my eyes, ready for whatever came next. But this time, it wasn't a surprise ambush or another rogue inspection. It was a clean-cut man in a suit who stepped out, carrying a briefcase and a small envelope. He identified himself as a representative from the State Agricultural Board. Apparently, my heritage status had attracted more attention than I realized. The state was reviewing my ranch as a potential model for rural preservation, which could bring in additional protection grants and educational partnerships with local schools. I smiled and thanked him. For all the pain Gloria had caused, her meddling had accidentally brought more good than she'd ever intended. That was irony wrapped in barbed wire. As the sun started to set that evening, I grabbed a glass of lemonade, walked the perimeter one last time, and sat down on the old rocker under the porch. Marvin stood out in the pasture, tail flicking at flies, completely unbothered by the drama that had gripped us for weeks. Birds were nesting in the eaves, the air smelled like fresh-cut grass, and the wind stirred the trees just enough to hum like a lullaby. I watched as one of the new motion lights kicked on near the fence. Just a rabbit. No Gloria. No HOA. Just peace. And then I noticed something. Down at the end of the driveway, just past the bend, someone had hammered a crooked little sign into the dirt. I walked down, cautious but curious, and when I got close enough to read it, I couldn't help but laugh. The sign said, "We tried, he sprayed, we lost, long live the ranch." No name, no claim, just a message. It could have been a prank, a joke from one of the neighbors, or maybe even one of the more self-aware HOA members trying to offer a truce. Either way, I left it there. It felt like a fitting marker for the end of a ridiculous, exhausting, and weirdly satisfying chapter. What started with a clipboard-wielding woman trying to repaint my barn ended with a community waking up, a ranch getting stronger, and a bull becoming a local icon. I didn't set out to make a statement. I just wanted people to respect a gate when it said, "Private." Turns out, sometimes you have to hold the line, literally and figuratively, and remind the world that not every patch of land can be tamed by entitlement or taken by force. Some places are worth defending. Some fences are built for a reason. And sometimes, just sometimes, the right can of pepper spray makes all the difference.